You're listening to the Renegade Blitz, the best podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at RBlitzPod, and at Blitz Videos. Read articles on RenegadeBlitz.com, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app.
And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz podcast. I'm Ty Polk with Brandon Walker. Chris Ward was unable to be a part of this podcast due to work requirements. So for the first time, it's just you and me, Brandon.
We've done it before. Oh, yeah, no, we had somebody else, but it's cool.
But it's all good as we have brought back Charlie Goldsmith of the Cincinnati Enquirer, who just came off reporting for the Bengals at a Super Bowl. And Charlie, well, congratulations on hopefully multiple time opportunity for your sake with the Bengals making it to the Super Bowl. But first, we just want to know, as the first reporter we've had on all year, how was that experience going out in Los Angeles for that Super Bowl?
I think the part that sticks with me is it makes you like reframe everything you've seen over the last couple of years and everything you've seen about the team to see, you know, solid starters like Logan Wilson and Tyler Boyd become kind of household names on the national level. To remember like, oh yeah, you remember that thing they did in week 3? It turns out that was way bigger than any of us thought. Like little moments like that got blown up was just a fascinating experience to be a part of. And it was a lot of fun paying such close attention to one football game as well, with so much going on.
What was a moment that maybe wasn't exactly reported that you got to see? We've asked Steelers PR people after the after party when the Steelers lost the Super Bowl against the Packers. Was there something like that you had that you could tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, so obviously it was a very close game. And I remember post-game, it was, they didn't have open locker rooms because of the whole COVID thing. They had separate stages, one for the visiting team and one for the losing team, one for the winning team. And I remember I looked over at the Rams side and it was 1,000 media members swarming, trying to ask questions. It was a celebration. And then 100 feet to the right was the losers stage, which was a very small crowd of media, a very much different tone, and just that dichotomy and how close the Bengals were to having that entire spotlight and celebration around them. That's something that I remember.
All right, I have a couple questions. Number one, when did you think that, because we talked about it last year on the second time you were here, because you had that feeling the second time. When did you feel that they was going to be a Super Bowl playoff caliber type team? And two, what was the Bengals' mindset after that Super Bowl loss?
Yeah, so when did I realize it with the Bengals? There were 2 games I point to. The first was week 7 on the road against Baltimore. They went, I think, like 41-17. It was the most lopsided game I saw all season. Burrow destroyed Baltimore, and the defense had such a genius game plan for Lamar that the next 3 teams the Ravens played did the exact same thing. And quite literally in that game, Joe Burrow at the end, because they had pulled the starters, was hanging out with Mixon and Higgins and Chase and said, if we can win this division, we can win it all. And he said it like that, like he was thinking about that for the first time. So that was when the seed was planted that, all right, maybe this is the best team in the division. Maybe this is a team with upside going forward. But the game where you really saw the Bengals as tried and true Super Bowl contenders, week 17 at home, they beat the Chiefs in this incredible game with this incredible comeback. Jamar Chase is the single best game I've seen in person by any receiver ever at any level. The Chiefs literally can't guard him. The Bengals come back and take down Patrick Mahomes. And that's a whoa moment. The Bengals now, can beat anyone. The offense is that good at that level. And they carried that momentum to the playoffs. And after the Super Bowl, they very quickly tried to turn the page. There kind of was some optimism. They arrived ahead of schedule. They made it to that stage sooner than anyone expected. And I think the overall mood right now is it's the exact same group. And so the expectations should be the same or even higher.
Yeah, and Joe Burrow was dealing with an appendectomy throughout most of training camp. How has that recovery gone for him? Because we've heard that it was ruptured appendix, and that's always rough to deal with for anyone, let alone an athlete, and especially a guy who got hit as often as he did last year.
Yeah, first Burrow said it was more than he expected. It knocked him off his feet for a while. But he came back, And then in his very first practice back, he just shreds 7-on-7 drills. Incredible stuff. Then comes back in 11s and consistently plays well. Full go against the Rams in joint practices. He said against the Rams, his velocity and his sprint speed weren't quite at that 100% benchmark he wanted it to be at. Burrow said today that his velocity and his sprint speed are at that mark now. So to me, the appendix is completely in the past, something that I'm not going to use to impact my evaluation of how Burrow plays in week 1. And again, it's something that took longer than expected, but now they've made it to the other side through.
Okay. We all know what happened. The Super Bowl. We all know why they did not win the Super Bowl last season. The offensive line. It's a hot topic here in Pittsburgh as well. So how do you feel they improved with the personnel that they brought in for the offensive line?
Well, let's go left to right across the board from their offensive line who started in the Super Bowl. Their left tackle, Jonah Williams, he's their best lineman. He's the same guy. Their left guard last year for the Super Bowl is currently out of football. Their center from the Super Bowl last year is currently out of football. The right guard from the Super Bowl is the third or fourth string guard on the bench for the Bengals on the 2022 roster. The starting right tackle, who the Bengals started in the Super Bowl, is currently on the injured reserve, and he'd be the second or third string right tackle if he were healthy right now. So it's a unit that's been completely overhauled with guys who they have a rookie in Cordell Volson at left guard, who is a question mark, but they've been impressed with. Their center is a guy who has started Super Bowl games with Tom Brady and played at a high level. Their right guard is a guy who has started also Super Bowl games with Tom Brady and played at a high level. And the right tackle, Lyle Collins, has had stretches where before they picked him away from Dallas, he was Dallas's best offensive lineman overall on really strong lines. They've got experienced guys who have played in the postseason with a lot at stake, who come with the right mindset and the right intensity and all those intangibles. They feel really excited about how they've overhauled that group.
But the one person that was able to really rise above that offensive line issue, really the Bengals were the typical offensive line, better at one thing than they are the other thing, and that was the running game, and it was with Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon kind of was the lone runner for Cincinnati, for lack of a better term. He was third in rushing yards last year. So what's the expectation for him? He's 26, so he's still plenty young, but I imagine that the Bengals want Samaje Perine, or maybe the guy who at least came in for a little bit of a stretch last year and managed to do some pretty well, Chris Evans. He had 5 for 23 against the Bengals in November. Has there been another guy that's firmly stepped up into that RB2 role, or is it still business as usual?
So it's still business as usual. The Bengals are really confident in how they've structured that room. Mixon is the ace of the running back room staff. He, you mentioned how good he was last season. Mixon was also the most contacted running back behind the line of scrimmage in the entire NFL last year. So even though he was hit so much in the backfield, he still ranked so highly in the NFL in yards. He is their bell cow, their tried and true back that they're going to be using and relying a ton on. With the exception of third down and pass protection situations, they rely on Mixon so much on neutral downs. They rely on him so extensively in the running game as the only number one running back, that running backs can't play more than 75% of snaps realistically without getting winded. So they let Perine play his very specific role on third downs as a pass protector, and they sprinkle in, and when I say sprinkle, I mean sprinkle specific plays for Chris Evans. He's got better as a runner, but he is really a receiving running back, and that's how they feature him with specific concepts for him. But Perine's role and Evans' role are really just kind of platoons as a response to picking up the slack for Mixon when he's not in the game, because they want him in the game as much as possible.
All right, we got a holy trinity at wide receiver. I think the best receiving core in football with T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Western PA native, and the rookie of the year, one of the best rookie seasons, maybe besides Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase.
A lot of LSU guys.
Feel about that? Yeah, a lot of LSU guys. How do you feel about? Can he get even better in year 2? What did you see? how he improved his game from last year?
I think he can get a lot better. Jamar Chase said this last year. He said there were plays where he didn't know what read he was. Plays where he knew what his assignments were, which is understandable for a rookie, but he didn't have the full breadth of the play around him. They gave him a very specific role last year, very almost identical to what he did at LSU as an outside the numbers ball winner, as a deep threat, and someone who had a simplified role over the middle on, dragging crossing routes and stuff just to get him the ball and dink and dunk him the ball. Again, a very specific role. Jamar Chase is at a point now where I expect him to be one of the most versatilely used receivers in the NFL. Jamar is going to be lining up in the slot a ton. There are brand new routes that Jamar has the opportunity to be featured in, that Jamar didn't have the opportunity to be featured in because he was still getting his feet wet in the NFL, in the playbook, and in a Bengals offense that, the Bengals offense, I think, has more of a mental toll, or it takes a certain IQ than almost any other offense in the NFL because how much receivers have to do before the snap. That's what Zach Taylor demands of them. Jamar Chase, they again have brand new ways they're going to be using him in the offense, brand new ways to be getting him the ball. And the goal is, Pittsburgh double teamed him in that second game last year. The Bengals think they have more answers now for when teams try to double team him for Jamar to truly not be taken out of it.
And there's another person I want to add to this as well, because the big story is CJ Uzomah is now in New York, and they brought in Hayden Hurst, who most Steelers fans remembers him as the number 2 behind Mark Andrews in Baltimore. He was chilling out in Atlanta for the past couple seasons. Just talk about that in terms of with Hurst. He's always been known as like somewhat of a reliable tight end. It felt like Uzomah was on his way to becoming someone that can be a little bit more than reliable. He was known as reliable, but of course, who knows what he could be now with New York with that situation.
I think CJ is a better overall, more well-rounded, more versatile tight end than Hayden Hurst. And what you saw in free agency and the dollar signs on each of their contracts reflected that. But Hayden Hurst is a better receiver than CJ Uzomah. Hayden Hurst is a more dynamic route runner. He's a lot better at the top of a route when he has to turn and change direction and using that to create leverage. He can do high point catches and leaping catches and sideline catches in a way that CJ couldn't. And so as a result, I mentioned this with Chase, but they have brand new ways that they are going to be planning on using Hayden Hurst that they couldn't use CJ Uzomah in last year because he didn't have that skill set. They, 25% of plays I saw in training camp, Hayden Hurst was split out wide or lined up in the slot. They never did that with CJ. Hayden Hurst isn't just an inline tight end who's going to block and leak out for a simple route. He's going to make a big difference in the red zone. And one of I think the stories of camp was how comfortable and how quickly he's gotten a role in the Bengals offense.
All right, we're going to switch to the defensive side of the ball. We're going to start with the defensive line. You guys hit in free agency with T.J. Hockenson, and you got Sam Hubbard on the other side, and then you got the D.J. Hill, but you guys lost Larry Uzomah. So how do you feel? You guys have more depth. How do you feel about the defensive line depth or on the defensive line?
Yeah, I think it's crucial that they get more pass rush in addition to what Trey Hendrickson provides this season. I think growing in that area is one of the most important things the Bengals have to develop. They feel very confident about that group. It's one of the best run-stopping defensive lines in the NFL. Trey Hendrickson has almost as many sacks over the last 2 years as anyone in the league. It's, like I mentioned, bringing the same core back, but then behind him, why they're more excited, is adding some splash rookies who are designated pass rushers in this scheme. Joseph Osai, technically a rookie, missed all last year with injury. He is a edge pass rusher who you wind him up and go. He has this speed and this quick twitch that's not Trey Hendrickson's game. That's really Osai's greatest strength on the team. They got a young defensive tackle named Zach Carter, third-round pick out of Florida. He played on the edge in college. The Bengals moved him inside because they saw a strength and the ability to use his arms at a really high level to create disruption on the inside as a pass rusher. He'll be a third down specialist for the Bengals as well. They have a couple other young defensive linemen, Cam Sample, Jeff Gunter, guys like that who are going to supplement that front four they have, which is tried and true and pretty reliable. And really, like I said, they need those young guys to help increase their pass rush efficiency. because that has been all on Trey Hendrickson a lot over the last 2 years, over the last year. And I think Hendrickson needs overall more help this season.
And I imagine some of that help probably could come from that linebackers group. And it's Logan Wilson, who had 4 interceptions, including an interception in the September game against the Steelers. And he also had a pick in the postseason. Just talk about the linebacking crew of the Bengals. I mean, Wilson is clearly at least the one that Steelers fans will have all eyes on. But is there someone else we should also look at?
Yeah, Logan Wilson is the star of this group. He's got the green dot. He calls the signals, really consistent fitting the run, really efficient. You know, Trubisky's a runner. That's part of his big game. That's been one of the big talking points. Wilson's the Bengals' best player at tracking the quarterbacks who have that athletic skill set outside the pocket. And he's really good in coverage too, like you mentioned. He led the team in interceptions last season. He starts next to Jermaine Pratt, who's a great run stopper and a really intelligent player who really just plays on neutral downs. And you're asking who could come out and surprise. He's not a linebacker, but on third downs and on passing downs and 2-minute drill and stuff like that, what's going to happen is rookie safety first-round pick Dax Hill is going to enter the game, take out Pratt. They're going to go into their dime defense. Hill, they have this Swiss Army knife roll expectation for him. He's going to do some linebacker responsibilities like guarding tight ends, playing zone in the middle of the field. They also think he can guard slot receivers. He can play a hook zone over the middle. He can play a true free safety zone over the top. He is the player off the bench that very few NFL teams have, with a first-round pick pedigree and a first-round pick athleticism. He looked like a star throughout training camp and in the preseason, and you're going to be seeing a lot of him all over the field on Sunday.
All right. Speaking of safeties, you have a Von Bell and another guy, Jesse Bates, who's been in a contract situation for a couple of years. We'll talk. Let's elaborate on that. And also, you have Eli Apple and Mike Hilton. But as in your secondary, how do you feel about the Bengals secondary? Do you think they can do it again, like be able to compete with Buffalo and lock down Kansas City enough for them to get back to the Super Bowl?
I don't think anyone can lock down Buffalo or Kansas City. You think, if you're asking me, what are the strengths of the Bengals? I think number one, obviously, would be Burrow in the passing game with the wide receivers. I think the second biggest strength of the Bengals is the secondary and the pass coverage you're getting from that unit. You won't find a more complex, versatile group and scheme maybe across the entire NFL. When Matthew Stafford was here for joint practices, he was saying he gets the sense that teams are picking and pulling and trying to steal elements from what the Bengals showed last season in the secondary, because they were executing such high concepts at a really high level. And like I mentioned, with basically the whole defense, they bring everybody back. So the defensive coordinator has spoken about how the trust and the continuity is going to have a direct impact on the complexity of the scheme, and the wrinkles are going to be able to change on a week-by-week basis. Like what they always say they take pride in is they need to make a halftime adjustment to something they did 8 weeks ago. It's a group of guys that has the reps and the experience and the IQ and the versatility to make that change incredibly quickly. They won the AFC title game because of a halftime adjustment they made, and they bring everyone back, like I said, with a bunch of really Pro Bowl caliber players headlined by Bell, Bates, and Awuje. And again, they view that as one of the strengths of the entire roster.
So what's your biggest worry as you take on the Steelers? Of course, it's new at the biggest position that you need out there, quarterback. And of course, everyone's going to say the easy answer, TJ Watt. But what else is there to look at in terms of the Steelers that makes the Bengals a little bit uneasy, I guess?
I think the Bengals, I think Joe Burrow, and I know the Bengals coaching staff, Minka Fitzpatrick is one of the most dangerous players in all of football. It's a room that goes out of their way so much to do everything they can to limit turnovers, because they know how explosive they can be when they're not giving the ball away. And Minka Fitzpatrick has a range of physicality, a variety in the ways they line him up, and anticipation. I think that's one of Minka's biggest strengths. The way they talk about Minka Fitzpatrick, it's like they're ready to suit him up for his gold jacket. Obviously, we'll see if he's a Hall of Famer, but they view him in such high regard in a way that I don't hear them talk about almost any defensive back in the entire NFL. I do think interceptions and turnovers are the one thing that can hold this offense back this season. And I know how they can keep Minka's impact as limited as they possibly can is up there with line 1A as things they want to be able to control on Sunday.
Well, to continue off of this thought, of course, with the offensive line for the Bengals being such a big question coming into it, and it's a lot similar to what Kansas City did last year after they lost the Super Bowl when they lost both tackles, which is retrofit the offensive line. Has there been any talk about how they view the Steelers, because it's always of course that defensive line for the Steelers as well, and of course they now have Larry Ogunjobi, and now TJ Watt's always going to be a problem, and with Highsmith, they want to see another step forward here for the Steelers. Is there a view that this is a good litmus test for them?
I think Zach Taylor said exactly that today. He went across the line naming all of those guys and how this defensive line is going to be, like you said, a litmus test for the Bengals. I wrote about this earlier this week. The Bengals right guard Alex Cappa. Before this year, the Bengals had quite literally never, and when I say never, I mean never paid big money for an offensive guard. Always it had been bargain bin replacements and mid-round draft picks. And they had a couple high-round picks in there, but they never in free agency spent at the position until this year when they went out and got Alex Cappa, who is the lineman they guaranteed the most money to, which is a sign of how they view him. And now Alex Cappa, what's your week one responsibility? Blocking Cam Hayward when they come through Alualu and Ogunjobi and that dominant defensive line you mentioned. They're going to be glad they have the guys they have right now because Pittsburgh is the kind of defensive line that can expose you when you don't have guys like that.
All right. I'm always about culture and stuff like that. Years ago, we would have never thought that they would have got an indoor facility or changed the name of the state. What's going on with what is it? What is it? Because I want to know. Is it because of the Joe Burrow effect, or the Bengals is basically trying to get everything into the 21st century?
I would say 3 people, technically 4 people, have come in and changed everything. Number one is Joe Burrow, a franchise that forces you to hold yourself to a higher expectation level. Also a quarterback who they're planning to guarantee lots and lots of millions of dollars in money to when he's eligible for an extension next year. You need cash up front. That's why you sell the stadium name. Group number 2 is Zach Taylor. When you talk about culture, Taylor has really been empowered in the even scouting, draft, and free agency process. What he has stressed, look at who the Bengals have drafted and signed. The running joke is every single one of them was a college captain or a captain on their former NFL team. It is a laundry list from Burrow to linebacker Logan Wilson to safety Von Bell to new center Ted Karras. All of these guys have captain experience and entered. When they entered, you knew that they were going to be high culture, high character guys. And then for stuff like the practice facility, also the stadium name, also the way the Bengals brand has changed. Two of Mike Brown's granddaughters, Elizabeth and Carolyn Blackburn, have been, Elizabeth. I believe it's Elizabeth and Carolyn. I get that family confused. Have come in and, brought young, new, fresh ideas and helped the Bengals connect with the fan base, with that being a priority. They've played very focal, central, public roles in conversations and projects like the new uniforms, the Ring of Honor, the practice facility. And it's not just the vision of Mike Brown and ownership anymore. It's the vision from all these different groups of people who have brought in new ideas.
All right, so do you have a prediction for this Sunday?
Yeah, I think that the Steelers' biggest weakness is cornerbacks. And as long as that's the case, they're going to have the weakness of the defense, because the offensive line is the weakness of the team. But that's a different conversation. The weakness of the Steelers' defense is their cornerbacks. I think until they fix that, they're going to have a really tough time stopping the Bengals. I think that the offensive line will be good enough. I think that Joe Mixon has run well against Pittsburgh. I would have Cincinnati winning like 28-20 or something like that, maybe 31-20 in a pretty strong statement for Cincinnati. You'll see Cincinnati's continuity bringing everyone and the coaching staff back, playing out pretty quickly in week 1.
Got anything, Brandon?
Okay, hold on. I have one question. As far as this, last year we had you on before the season. Last year we would have probably been this. to ask you, what team is the AFC? What team is the Bengals better than in the AFC? Now we're gonna flip it. Who do you think could be better? Is
Good point.
the Bengals' biggest threat? Because last year y'all was what 4-12 or something, but now coming off Super Bowl, who do you think you fear? The Bengals not fear, but is the biggest competition in the AFC?
I think there's a five team top tier in the AFC. I think in no particular order. I'm going to try to do this alphabetically, but don't make fun of me if I get it wrong. The Bengals, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Ravens are in a tier of their own at the top of the AFC. I think that the teams with the best quarterbacks, with the best arm strength, are something you've seen the Bengals not struggle with, but any team in the NFL is susceptible to players like that. And teams with defensive playmakers, just like any team, the Bengals have been susceptible to star playmakers like even Fitzpatrick or Watt when they face them. I think that helps you narrow it down to Buffalo and Los Angeles, two teams with incredible quarterbacks, with incredible arm strength, incredible receivers who no team can stop, in Allen and Diggs, and then star defensive playmakers in guys like Von Miller and guys like Khalil Mack, and guys like Joey Bosa, J.C. Jackson, Tre'Davious White. Both those teams have those stars on the defense and all those other strengths I mentioned. So I think the Bengals are in a sub tier below the below the Chargers and the Bills. If I were power ranking them, then I'd have the Bengals and then the Chiefs and then the Ravens. Two teams the Bengals swept last season when they played both of them twice.
Okay, they'll have that third team. So that's all I have. Oh, I do want another thing because last time these two teams met, the Bengals pretty much dog walked them across the field. Do you notice the change in Cincinnati when they see the Steelers now?
That's been one of the biggest talking points of the week. Last year when the Bengals beat the Steelers the second time, there was this talk of changing of the guard and a sign of a new era, and it's pretty true. And now the way they're talking about this, it's like a crucial divisional game, but not like the rivalry with the external expectations and the pressure that we had forever associated between the Bengals and the Steelers. There has been a very different feel this week, but here's the last thing I'll say on that. They wanted it to be that way, how they've overhauled the entire team over the last 3 seasons. It's a bunch of guys who have no memories, no experience, no track record of what the Bengals-Steelers rivalry means, basically with the exception of Boyd and Hubbard. It's a group of guys like Joe Burrow doesn't remember, the 2015 playoff game. He wasn't a part of that. That's not an experience he connects to. He has set that tone. The new free agents have set that tone that this is a divisional rivalry game, but not the barometer to judge an entire season, which this game was for the Bengals for a long time.
I think that's well said there, Brandon. Anything else? Because I got nothing.
I got nothing.
Well, that's Charlie Goldsmith of the Cincinnati Enquirer. Charlie, thanks as always for coming on the show and hope to see you again later this year.
Good to see you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All
right, Brandon. So this is pretty much week 1, and they're right. It really was a changing of the guard. I felt different feelings in September personally, but yeah, when you really put it that way, November really felt like a solid kick where it was like, okay, things are different. Like that last year, that victory with no Joe Burrow, it was like, okay, this is a team that's on a really different level now.
Yeah, it's just like it felt like that way. Remember that infamous article that got me in trouble on Twitter all the time? Guess who their opponent was?
The Cincinnati Bengals.
Oh yeah, so we want a prediction for this game. I've got to pick Cincinnati at this point. I'm gonna say 37. No, not 37. 31-21.
I think the Bengals pull away towards the end. It's close throughout most of the game, 3/4 of it, and then that final frame, they pull away.
Mostly because they have the better quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's really going to be apparent for the next couple of years with the Steelers, barring something coming out of the woodwork, be it Kenny Pickett, be it someone else. It doesn't really matter. But yes, quarterback play really was the difference in a lot of what the Steelers did last year. I mean, you can have a broken Hall of Famer, but he's still a Hall of Famer. So,
Right.
Of course, when you look at it like that, I'm gonna say 35-17 Bengals.
All right. And what do you think the Steelers' record is going to be for the year? Chris had them at 7-10. For them being a downfall is the offensive line.
Yeah, which is another thing in there. And another question, of course, is the corners. Even with Witherspoon, who I think showed himself pretty well, it's like, all right, let's have a full season with you in which everybody knows that you're here and they're coming for you. And while I like his size at corner and all that stuff, and of course, there was a lot of great talk about him from the Seahawks writer that we had on last year. The questions are everybody else, and Wallace has been a firm CB2, CB3 maybe in Buffalo. Cam Sutton, the tweener, is he an outside cornerback? Is he a slot guy? That's another thing, and I feel that the fact that there's no really heir apparent where it's like, all right, do they have another cornerback back there if a team decides to go 4 wide? I mean, there's always questions with Norwood. That's something that we really didn't talk about because the offensive line, it was critical for them to be good this year. If there was one time where the Steelers' offensive line really needed to be good, aside from the last 2 years, it's this year. And so far, there's already been a lot of changeover with it, and the season hasn't even officially started yet.
Yeah, you're signing people off this like washed up. He gave up 8 sacks last year. Davis, 8.
When you're trading for people before the season and it's not a considerable upgrade or something like that, there's a lot of things you have to look at and go, uh-oh.
Yeah.
I mean, the questions for this team is really quarterback, the line, maybe wide receiver depth in terms of, well, who's firmly going to step up. Middle linebacker, though hopefully Robinson at least quells most of that question. And then, of course, cornerback depth. I mean, in terms of safety, everyone's probably going to say, don't forget to add Edmonds in too, but I think that he's a solid run support safety out there, and everybody wants him to be Polamalu, and you don't need Troy Polamalu whenever you have a free safety and a center fielder like Minkah Fitzpatrick. All you're asking is for when it's time to tackle, you make the tackle.
Right. But yeah, the secondary, they got a lot. They got a lot of holes.
Defensive line just has questions of who's going to firmly step up. I think they've got enough talent on paper.
Right. They have enough talent. There's a lot of questions. Like I said, it's like we got a strong Oreo cookie, but it's still like a black and gold Oreo cookie.
Yeah.
Strong and firm on the outside, but you soft in the middle. As in like the middle of the roster, as in like the middle of the makeup of the roster.
There's no question. There's no question the high-end talent is there for the Steelers. They have the high-end talent that if they take over a game, they could go and steal it just like how they did last year. The problem is that the pedigree at quarterback, of course, is one thing. They have a guy that statistically maybe could do something, and they're hoping that the guy they have now officially backing up, and we'll talk about that later as well, is going to do something. But to finish up the season prediction thing, I'm actually going to be less positive than Chris for the first time on this podcast ever, and I'm going to say 6-11.
Good thing I had to roll something for the Curry. It didn't go out because I put him at 9-8.
Yeah, when I'm captain
9-8
positive,
because it's like, and I'm supposed to be the negative one here. I think with Thomas coaching and TJ Watt's gonna bail him out of a couple jams. I could see a Boswell 58-yard kick, something crazy like that, and you'll be wondering like how did they win? How?
I mean,
so I'm gonna stick with 9-8, but that it's a shaky 9-8. If you get what I'm saying.
I don't think it could be any more shakier than what it was last year.
It might be a little bit shakier than that if they do it. It's gonna be like they're gonna be pulling some miracle wins.
Stars have to align for them.
Yeah, a double renegade during the game or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. But let's move on before we wrap this up with a little bit more news and notes around the Steelers. Of course, everyone lost their mind when the depth chart was originally announced, and it was Kenny Pickett as quarterback number 3, Mason Rudolph as quarterback number 2, and as expected, Mitch Trubisky, who was named captain, QB1. It was later explained to be a clerical error in terms of copy and paste by the Steelers, somewhere in the Steelers department, in terms of, I guess, figuring out web applications, or maybe just putting in images in there or coding, whatever it is. And it's been a big debate across many of the sports media landscape. And being that, Brandon, you are actually in the stadium more than me and Chris combined, so, and the press box, of course. So I guess it's fair to ask you this. Do you believe that this was a clerical error?
You asked me a tough one. I believe it probably can. The Steelers organization deserves the benefit of the doubt on a clerical error. However, it ain't a good look for Mason Rudolph. That don't hurt. That doesn't help his ego at all. That's another sign that he just release him. I know you want the draft pick, but for his sake, time to go. Y'all put the fan base, the media, the team itself has put him through too much. Let him go have a good career. It's just like, I know you want the 4th round pick. Just get a 7th round pick and keep it moving.
Yeah, I think anything at this point would work out well for Mason Rudolph, who I got to give him credit. If he went all CM Punk in one of those press conferences, I would not blame him one bit. Mm-hmm. I really wouldn't, because at this point, it's not about professionalism with him. It's patience. I would have lost my patience at this moment. And the fact that he's just sitting in there and with as much as I think, as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of people that will never forgive him for what is soon to be said out on that field, allegedly. And you can't forgive racism, but I think you could go, like, if there was sin atonement in any way, shape, or form, Mason Rudolph has done it.
Yeah.
Because this is just public embarrassment on the highest level right now. And I'm gonna say this right now. I don't think an organization would do this, especially after, you could sit in that stadium and hear that. That would be malicious if that was intentional. And I don't think you want to be malicious in a situation like this with this man. I think that was just an incredible, terrible, no good, bad day in terms of whoever is on that side running that clerical. And I'm willing to bet a high sum of money that someone got reprimanded for that. So that I'm gonna say that this was we'll find out about that maybe 5 years down the road or something like that, like we always do. But man, I'd say this is a clerical error. It's a clerical error because you don't do this on purpose. You don't try to. As much as everybody wants to say this organization is arrogant, there's just certain things you don't do whenever you get the entire context and gist, and whenever you have common sense.
Yeah, I'm giving them the benefit. We all think. You said the Steelers are arrogant?
Well, in terms of maybe a football operations standpoint in terms of how they want to behave with making moves. And I mean that in a way because you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't mean this with malice, but it's just like in a way, I guess it's like maybe organizational cockiness is a better term than arrogance.
All right. That's the same daggone thing, Ty.
Well, it's cockiness. It's just because it's like, we're good, we know it. We're good, we know it, and things will work out. Arrogance is just sitting around saying everything is fine when everything else is on fire. So that's my bad on me. But I went a little bit too sports
I'm giving the organization. I mean, yeah.
In terms of this was an outright mistake, a bad mistake, but a mistake.
A bad mistake. We're gonna call it. Somebody had a bad day at the office. Probably wanted to get home, and it just happened. Just copy and paste it. Whew. Yeah, but please, please do something with Rudolph. Let that man go.
They gotta let that guy go at this point.
It's not even, you can't. It's like,
I feel like the only thing that would be worse for him in terms of being dragged in the mud if they actually do have proof. That's really the only way this could get worse for that man.
It's like.
But let's end this on a much more happier note. Of course, with the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception happening, and Brandon, you also covering those good old Penn State Nittany Lions, it's fitting to say that Franco Harris's number 32 jersey will be retired Week 16 when the Steelers take on the Raiders, and I believe that's Christmas night, isn't it?
Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve, even better. I mean, at least they get to go home and enjoy some Christmas time there, but that's another thing. But what a great Christmas present for really not only Steelers fans, it's the entire league, because it's known as probably one of the storybook moments out there. There's a million people that'll say that it was an incomplete pass and whatever, and I also believe that whatever rule it was about, if it hits off a receiver's hand, no one else can catch it. It's like, come on, man. That's what makes the league fun. That's a stupid rule. That's a stupid rule.
But it's still crazy that 50 years later, you don't have the technology to conclude the play.
Do you?
So this
I'm
is
pretty
like
sure.
the biggest. I have never seen a conclusive catch of that play.
They found new angles for it. They found a new angle for it, but it's too high up, and I'm like, there's bound to be some. NFL Films has a ton of things out there that could probably find it, but I mean, when you look at it, they put it into they put it upscaled at the 4K and 1080 HD, all types of stuff, and I think it's one of those things where you just have to go like, man, it happened. Whether it was right or wrong, it happened, and it changed the fortunes of an entire franchise as we know it. And a town, you can argue.
Yeah, yeah. It's the thing is, the lure of the play that we can't see, that it makes the play even more awesome. You know what I'm saying? It makes the play that you can't. I'm like, did it hit a Raider? Did it hit a Steeler? Did he catch the ball cleanly? Like, we'll never know. And that's what makes the Immaculate Reception. And as far as Franco Harris goes, he is the best running back second best running back in the 70s, behind he who will not be named.
Yeah.
And yeah, but the thing is this. One more. Don't you gotta retire Terry Bradshaw's number? You gotta retire a lot of numbers. The Steelers are going down a slippery slope here.
That's a slope they haven't really gone down much of, and they've decommissioned a lot of numbers when you think of it. But there's a lot of things you could do. I mean, you want to so what numbers can be retired? Bradshaw? Do you want to go with Blunt? Lambert,
Bell Blunt.
Ham, Mean Joe.
They already retired his number.
They already retired. Well, that's one of the
He was
reasons
the
why.
first.
Well, Mean Joe was the first. So what else? You could go with Mean Joe. Ben's going to be up there eventually. The Bus.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, that's what I mean. Like Palomalu, like you got a lot of numbers there.
There's even a lot of there's James Harrison. If you want to go sentimental, Joey Porter.
Yeah, no, they need somebody. I went 45 minutes without mentioning number 55. Do not have me.
Oh, come on. Wow, what's the matter? I mean,
don't have me do it. I was trying to chill. I was trying to go the whole podcast.
I mean, for the love of God, they still do his entire We Ride thing after he's been gone as the linebackers coach.
I'm not even talking about that. Yeah, no. I'm talking
when I
about
think of Steelers linebackers, he's one of the first that comes to mind in terms of my lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. They should retire his number, but I don't want that number 50. I don't want the last person that wears number 55 to be the current person that wears number 55. Somebody else got to re-up and bring prestige.
Oh
back
my
to that
God!
number
Of course, I didn't think of it. Oh, you are such a degenerate for that man. I can't stand it.
You knew it. You like.
He's your Kwame Brown.
He might be coming after me in about 20 years.
Oh my God. My goodness. Let's just end this podcast anyway. Brandon, thank you so much for being a part of it. It's only the two of us. Hopefully Chris will be back for the recap in next week's preview podcast. But until then, I'm Ty Polk. That's Brandon Walker. You have been listening to the Renegade Blitz.
Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at @RBlitzPod, and @BlitzVideos. Read articles on RenegadeBlitz.com. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. The Renegade Blitz podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else you can listen to podcasts.